How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined, as always, by my good friend, my co-host on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing tonight, man?
Happy to be with you tonight, Jack. Super stoked that we're going to be able to break down a bunch of this going on. Both college football has been awesome in the new 12-team playoffs, and we've got the NFL playoffs conference championships coming up just this Sunday. So much fun stuff to break down, Jack. Super stoked to be back with you. Been fighting some sickness here lately, man, like sore throat and just some sickness the last couple of weeks. But super fired up to be with you. How are you doing?
Doing good. We're hanging in there. There's been a lot of snow going across the south, and we got a tiny bit of it. Enough snow that some schools canceled school, but if you went to college in Massachusetts like we did, you're like, that's nothing. It's not even worth mentioning that it snowed. I mean, like seriously, we're talking like true dusting. Like it's still seeing lots of grass poking up through, snow on some parts of the car, but not all the way on the car, So it was funny. It was the first time experiencing winter precipitation down here since we've moved down here and seeing the way everybody reacts to it. But no, it's been good. Football. It was a hard weekend for me this last weekend as the Lions lost to the Commanders and as the national championship was between Notre Dame and Ohio State, two probably my two least favorite college football teams, and so had to endure that. But we're going to talk about it because it did happen, and despite our own personal biases, this is our job. We got to talk about it, and so we're gonna talk about the game specifically and some of the players that we're watching out for, especially come with the draft being just around the corner. The national championship has happened, and so it's like boom, we're immediately moving into that crazy. There's no break, right? I'm seeing guys from both teams jumping in the portal now that the season is over for them and everything. Just crazy stuff. But I think now that we have experienced the entirety of the 12-team playoff, we need to talk about it a little bit on a macro level. And so, Nick, what was like one thing out of the 12-team playoff that you were like, this was good, this was a success, I'm really, really glad that we got to experience this and that this happened because the playoff was expanded?
So I was super fired up that I was just really fired up that we got teams that we normally wouldn't see in a playoff at all, who gave us good games. Like, who thought that Arizona State was going to wrestle Texas and fight them tooth and nail? Like, I know that if you asked somebody a year ago, no way they thought a rebuilding Arizona State was going to do anything like that.
Yeah.
And just that game by Scatabo, he was a baller throughout that game, did so much in the pass game, pass catching game, run game. And that's just not something that you'd be able to see in the old playoffs. And so I was just super fired up that you got to see a legacy game. You got to see two really like hard-nosed rosters trying to beat the heck out of each other. Mm-hmm. And that's just so much fun, man. It feels like back in the old 4-team playoff that there was a good chunk of the time where it's like, well, out of these 4 teams, like at least one of these teams might be a notch below the rest of them or 2 notches below, and they just get the doors blown off of them. Yep. And we had a couple of these games that were tough, but a couple of these games that we thought were going to be blowouts turned into absolute fist fights, and that's just awesome, man. I was super fired up about that.
Yeah, I think, and before I even get to mine, something that we just need to address and just say, and I think it's crazy that no one has said so far, is people are upset that the higher ranked team beat the lower ranked team and beat them by a considerable margin. And I just want to step back and just recognize that if Clemson had gone to Texas during the regular season and had beaten Texas, it would have been quite the upset, right? These two rosters, the way their seasons were looking, if this, let's say instead of being the first round of the playoffs, it was the last game of the regular season, Clemson would be going to Texas probably as like an 8-point underdog, right? Maybe a 10-point underdog. And so I think we need to stop being so upset like, oh, well, look at the playoff. We expanded it, but we're putting all these losers in that aren't worth being in there. Like, That's just ridiculous. That's how this works. The more teams you let in, the weaker the weaker the competition of the last couple teams that get in is going to be. But that's fine, because just because we didn't experience an upset this time doesn't mean that we won't next year or the year after that or the year after that. And we did experience upsets, right? Ohio State blew the doors off of Oregon. Notre Dame beat Georgia. Our national championship was between the 7 and the 8 seed, right? We had upsets. Everybody needs to relax. Everybody needs to calm down. There's definitely some things that should change potentially when it comes to who gets buys. But in terms of, like everyone's like, oh, Indiana shouldn't have gotten in. We saw that when it came to playing Notre Dame. Well, the next team that would have gotten in was Alabama, who lost to Michigan in their bowl game, right? So like, we just need to relax. This is sports. Random things happen. Upsets happen. Anybody can beat anybody on any given day. We see that all the time, especially in collegiate sports, where, even though they're getting paid like professionals nowadays, right? They aren't professionals, they're less mature. They don't have as much experience, and you'll have a guy more likely than, when we look at the NFL, have a really, really off game. And so just want to preface that, say that I totally agree with you. I'm glad we got to see some of those teams. I think Arizona State doing what they did against Texas just goes to show that expanding the playoff, letting more teams in, is definitely for the better instead of for the worse. And yes, you're going to have some games that are snooze fests, but you know what? We had those in the NFL playoffs so far too, right? So the Bills Broncos game, it's like, we're not complaining that the Broncos got in because the Bills beat them that badly, because it's like, well, the Bills are that much better of a team, and we all knew that. So like, let's relax a little bit. The one thing that I was like, thought was just so cool was that we got games on college campuses, man. Like that was unbelievable. That was awesome. Every single one of those first round matchups being on campuses, being home games for those teams, for those schools, was just really, really cool. It was super cool seeing like Penn State, for example. Their semester had ended. They extended the time that students had before they had to be completely, moved out for the winter break, so they could go to the game. Right? That's just stuff that's really, really cool. I'm really, really glad we got to see that, and that those students got that, because I think it made for such a better game. And actually, it kind of leads into one of the things that I was frustrated by is after that first round, every other game felt like meh, right? Not meh, like the games itself were good, but like, if Notre Dame is playing Ohio State in New Orleans, like when they're literally separated like a 2-hour drive between South Bend and Columbus, probably a little bit longer than that. But it's like, or some of the other games, like Texas was playing Arizona State I think they were playing in Arlington, so it wasn't that bad of a drive for Texas. But Arizona State won their conference, and they got rewarded by basically having to play an away game. So it almost makes me wish that we could get all of the playoff games except maybe the national championship as home games for the higher seed. But still, it was awesome. It was a great first round, especially with those games, and those environments were just really, really cool. And I think we definitely saw a lot that was for the better of expanding the playoff. But Nick, and if you have anything to comment on what I just said, by all means. But also want to ask, what was one thing that you were like, this was super frustrating about this playoff?
So the thing that really stands out to me that was really frustrating, it draws into something I really, as like a dude, I really respect talking about college football. I really like listening to Joel Klatt, and something he's really been banging the drum for specifically is the path for these really high seeds. Oregon got one and done against Ohio State. And Ohio State, if you could have picked anyone to go against, if you're Oregon, number 1 seed, undefeated, just absolutely like did an awesome job throughout their season to stay undefeated. And they got rewarded with the most angry, focused, beat their ass, probably second best team in the country up to that point, it seemed like, team. And I just feel like that's really screwed up that, hey, you don't get, man, You don't get a home game. You don't get an easy or even reasonable opponent. You get the future national championships who whooped you down. Like, the fact that they got rewarded with that is just really screwed up. And I really think that there needs to be a different way of figuring out this seeding. And a theory or like a plan that I really love is the idea of the upper half teams in the seeding getting to pick their opponent, draft them. So like number 1 seed will get to say, hey, we may get matched up with the number 12 seed because they're the worst team left or bracket wise. But it's like, hey, what if the 12 seed you just got a bad matchup against, or they snuck in there because they were injured for a bunch of the year, but they're like the second most talented team, but they've been injured. Like, there's a whole host of reasons why a really good team could be pushed down the bracket. And like, to just be matched up against a team that got pushed down the bracket for alternative reasons could be not making their own championship game for the Big Ten championship, could be injuries, could be a whole host of reasons. And you get rewarded with a beatdown potentially, or even like a dog fight. If you're the number 1 seed, why are you in a dog fight in your first playoff game? That just really, I think, was kind of screwed up. I think obviously, like, hey, if you don't want to be in a dog fight, like, put some more effort into it, not getting smacked. But like, hey, man, they did their job to win every single game the whole season up to that point. They did their job. That's all you can ask for. And they just played everybody who's on the schedule and they beat them. They did their job.
Yeah.
And they did their job until they couldn't anymore in a 1-game scenario.
Yep.
And to be rewarded that way is just really screwed up to me. So
yeah,
that's where
and I mean, if they I think the only reason we're talking about it is because they had to play an Ohio State team that we all saw as like far better than the 8 seed, right? Like it's not like, like we talked about, it's not like, hey, this was an upset. This was a true upset. I think it was because Oregon was as good as they were, but I think a lot of people, you look at the teams, you look at how good Ohio State looked against Tennessee in the game before. You think about, the Oregon Ohio State matchup during the regular season. I think most people would have said, like, no, this is kind of like a coin flip game, right? And so, yes, maybe the result didn't seem like it was a coin flip game, but like you said, the 1 seed, if they're going to lose to the 8 seed, it shouldn't be like, well, yeah, we really weren't sure how this was going to go. It should have been wow, this was an upset. Like Arizona State surprised everybody and went in and beat a much better Oregon team, something like that.
Right.
I would say that the thing that frustrated me the most, and this is something that, as I'm saying, it's not going to change. We are moved past this at this point. It is just the reality, and we need to come to terms with it. Is just what it means to be a national champion in Division I college football nowadays. And before, that meant that you were the best of the best all season. You were one of the 2 best of the best all season, so that you got a chance to play in 1 game that was a winner take all for the national championship. Then we went to the playoff. It was 4 teams. It was like, okay, but still like very top cream of the crop. Yes, occasionally there's a big drop off between the top 2 and then the next 2, or the top 3 and then the last one that gets snuck in. But in general, we are taking the cream of the crop, the best of the best, and we are putting them in this tournament. And now that we're in 12 teams, it just means that there's more outcomes, there's more teams that have a chance. And for as much as we like that, there's also frustration that comes with that because we have a selection committee. It's not like the NFL where it's like, listen, 7 teams in the AFC and 7 teams in the NFC make the playoffs, but you know how we know it? It is completely arbitrary. It is completely having to do with their records. And yes, we have tiebreakers, but again, none of those tiebreakers are a committee sitting around and going, well, I think that team looks better than this team. And so because of that, here we are. We had a national championship between Ohio State and Notre Dame. And what that did is that took the 2 biggest upsets in college football this season, and made them meaningless. is really what it did. If anything, it like benefited Ohio State to lose to Michigan because of the camaraderie and the way that they really rallied around that and how embarrassed they were by that, that made them go scorch earth the rest of the, through the playoffs, right? If this were the 14 playoff, neither of those teams would be making it. If this were even farther back to the BCS days where it was just the top two teams playing in the BCS national championship, neither of those teams would have had a chance. And to some extent, I'm like, you know what? This is cool. I'm glad that we have this. But also because we have this very, subjectively decided playoff format by a committee, you're looking at it and you're like, these teams, like, yes, maybe their ceiling is up here, but their floor they showed is like way down here, right? And so like, how are we supposed to just look at that and go like, like, oh no, this is just like when we had national champions in the past, right? We can't look at it that way. And we need to come to terms with not looking at it that way. I need to come to terms with it. But also, media needs to not try and portray it that way as well, which is I think the biggest frustration with that.
Mm-hmm. I feel you there. I think that the root of what you're trying to get at that you kind of like didn't mention to me is that we're talking about NIU, we're talking about Michigan, and like these teams are clearly on different levels who they lost to, and like every team is playing against a variety of competition at different levels. There are FBS schools, there are Division I schools, there's a whole host of Power 4 compared to non-Power 4 schools. There's a variety of teams that are at different levels in the sport. That's just how it is. At the NFL, you don't have that. There are 32 teams, and you're playing one of the 31 other teams this Sunday. You're not playing a lower level team. You're not playing a team who's only played X number of games outside of like bye week stuff. Like you're playing a team who has played the exact same number of games that you have, who's the exact same level of team as you are outside of like just competitive who's won more games. But like, hey, you can look at each of their resumes straight up and be like, one of them's got more wins. One of them has better wins, so you can be like, hey, they've got better wins. I think of them more highly, but like the wins speak for themselves. College football, because of the different conferences, because of the different schedules that are made, number of conference games, number of cross-conference games, it just feels like it's such a mess to be like, well, Texas played a cream puff schedule, but they won a whole bunch of games. But like, I know that some of these games are fraudulent wins, not that like they were frauds in how they won, but it's like, hey, you beat Middle Tennessee State. And I know that that's not as good of a win as against USC or Michigan or whoever, whatever team. And so that really kind of is the root of things for me, that like you and I both know NIU is a worse loss than Michigan. But like there's a whole host of wins and losses that are at these different levels that you're kind of having to judge, that just get thrown in the machine and spit out the result of like how the committee sees these things. And it's just so uneven in how it's judged. It's so uneven in how the public's able to parse through it. And I think that's a heart of like why these upsets and why the whole committee selection process is so confusing for us, the consumer.
Yeah, and it feels like, and we talked about this when we sort of going into I think it was going into conference championship week. We're really looking at things and talking about this and the rankings and everything. But it's weird the way, like a game happens, a team plays another team, and if they win that game, then it gives the team that won more value. But if they lose that game, it doesn't give the team that beat them more value. It just shows like, oh well, it makes this team worse. And so like the example that I keep using, because it has to do with my team, is when Syracuse beat Miami, instead of that showing how good Syracuse was, it was like, oh well, this shows how bad Miami is. And you look at when Ohio State lost to Michigan, and how that was like, oh well, Michigan's a really good team, right? And it's just like, okay, well, this, yes, we're comparing apples and oranges, but sometimes it feels like we're comparing fruits and vegetables instead of two fruits. But we should move into talking about the game itself. The game itself was actually a pretty exciting game in the end. It seemed at first like, oh boy, this isn't going to be fun. This is going to be a blowout. For all of the people that were haters of the 4-team playoff because like, oh, we get these ups or these blowouts, the everyone else could be like, well, it doesn't matter. We had 12 teams, we had a blowout. But Notre Dame sort of puts it together a little bit in the second half, makes things a little bit more competitive. One decision that I remember that was like, Marcus Freeman, what are you doing? That was pretty weird. Was when Notre Dame was down by, I think they were down by 16 at that point, and they had a 4th and goal. And yes, Ohio State is by far the best red zone and goal line defense in the country, without a doubt. But I mean, you're playing for the national championship. It doesn't matter if you lose that game. They kick a field goal instead of trying to go for it on 4th down. But otherwise, felt like a game that was just a really, really even match in terms of like nobody doing stuff stupid really, and it just came down to Ohio State was the better team and won that game, and they looked at basically the whole way through. Nick, sort of what were some of your initial thoughts watching through that game?
Mm-hmm. So one, I think that field goal, was that the field goal that he doinked off the upright, or was that a different field goal?
Yeah.
That was the field goal that the Notre Dame kicker doinked, which made it an even worse looking decision, even though
Right.
it was a questionable decision at the time. So looking at this, it feels like first off, before anything else, just got to give Brian Day some love. Like, this is a dude who's been on the perpetual hot seat the last couple of years. All the losses in a row now to Michigan. Like, he was getting flamed by his own fan base, let alone the rest of college football and their fans.
Definitely.
But like Brian Day getting his absolute worst loss potentially of his whole career, losing to this Michigan team this year in the last week of the season. Like, that was absolutely devastating. And to turn that around into 4 straight wins against really quality opponents, and really for the most part making it look relatively easy as far as like 4 really tough games against good opponents. Like, they were laying a smackdown against some other really quality teams.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, to me, shows a level of talent and focus, where we've seen this super talented team lose to a Michigan and lose to an Oregon team that looked to be dueling them earlier in the season. And they didn't mess around this playoffs. They didn't mess around a lick. They just said, we've got bigger, stronger, faster dudes. We've got schemes. We've got effort and energy. And they went and put it all out on the field and left it all out on the field. They did all that and more, everything you could ask for if you're an OSU fan. And that's just so impressive for them. And Ryan Day, you get a really nice slice of the credit here. Your team was focused and buttoned up and really laid a smackdown on these other teams. So just got to give him his flowers first. Anything you got to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I won't shy away from that. I've definitely been, a big critic of Ryan Day, just because, like everybody has said, he hasn't really won the big games. Like outside of the Michigan games, like, okay, lost to Michigan, went 11-1, didn't get to play in the Big Ten championship game, then went and played in the Cotton Bowl against Missouri and laid a goose egg in that game, right? And I know that we're in the NIL portal era where it's like, okay, well, once our playoffs don't mean anything anymore, then we're jumping in the portal so that we can get snatched up before before all of the good landing spots, say, for a quarterback are filled up already. So like I understand that, but still, he before this year has not been able to really do much in the big games. Has gotten outcoached definitely a lot. I mean, he got outcoached by Jim Harbaugh the 3 years before this year, and then got outcoached by Sharon Moore this year. And so I think it would have been really, really easy, and none of us really would have been surprised if after all of that came into the playoffs and, lost to Tennessee at home week 1, or went to the Rose Bowl and lost to Oregon. And they didn't. He just didn't. They just put it together, and they were just like, listen, we are not going to let this happen. We are not going to let the wheels fall off the bus. We are going to get this thing all the way to where it needs to go. And they did, and he definitely deserves props. He deserves his flowers for doing that. I think especially not just this national championship, but also because of how long he's been there. At this point, like including this national championship and now everything after, we can really look at be like, all right, whether it's success or whether it's failure, this is all on the shoulders of Ryan Day, right? Like the little bit of what Urban Meyer had built before Ryan Day stepped in, that's all gone at this point. I mean, the legacy and what playing for Ohio State means, having to do not just with Urban Meyer, but Jim Tressel before him and lots of other coaches, that will always be there. But when it comes to like, these are guys that came to Columbus and came to Ohio State because Urban Meyer recruited them. The famous quote of Jim Harbaugh, some people are born on third base and think they hit a triple, talking about Ryan Day. Like, no, I mean, he didn't hit a home run this year. What he did is he hit a double and then he stole third, and with some excellent base running, got all the way to home. But still, he scored a run, and that's 100% worthy of all the props, all the congratulations. It'll be really, really interesting to see, especially in this portal era, how things move forward, right? Like Ohio State doesn't have a quarterback right now. They don't. Will Howard graduated. Dwayne Brown, the guy that used to wear number 33 and played quarterback, or Devin Brown, guy that wore number 33 and played quarterback, he's transferred to Cal. So it's like, okay, are you gonna go get a guy in the portal again? Are you gonna recruit? It'll be interesting. But I think also you look at the talent on this Ohio State team, man.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't think they surpass, but I think they are below, but worthy of being in the same conversation as say the 2019 LSU team or the 2020 Alabama team or the 2001 Miami team. Like, and those we look at all of those teams. We think about the guys that got drafted right after that year, and probably the best guy on this Ohio State team can't get drafted for 2 more years, and that's Jeremiah Smith. But I'm just looking at this team all over the place, seeing draftable talent, seeing highly draftable talent, which as we get into talking draft a little bit more, we'll talk about a little bit more. But yeah, this Ohio State team is a really good team, and for all of the people that were for the 12-team playoff. Obviously, this was honestly the best result for that. You had a team that was the 8 seed, right? They weren't one of the top 4 teams, but they were an 8 seed that had boatloads of talent. And instead of not having a chance to compete for a national championship because of having one really bad game, instead they get to redeem that. They get to go on this run. They get to beat Tennessee. They beat Oregon, they beat Texas, and they beat Notre Dame. Like, they beat dudes. They don't just pile on some mediocre talent. They beat dudes all the way to the championship, and it was just really, really well done by Ryan Day and this Ohio State staff.
Yep, I'm there with you. I just feel like this roster, we're able to see full-fledged now. Like, it's like they've got 2 stud receivers, 2 stud edge rushers, 2 stud corners, 2 stud running backs, a bunch of good linemen. Like, they've just got a bunch of talent all over the place, bunch of draftable talent, first, second, third round players all over the place. And although I gave my gripes earlier about Oregon's path, even though their path wasn't even a path, it was a one loss postseason for them. Ohio State gets all the credit for having that difficult path. It's like they inherited the path that would have been Oregon's and just whooped everybody in front of them. Like, they said, oh, Notre Dame, you've been streaking. Nobody's been able to stop your quarterback run game. We're beating you soundly. Our receivers able to do everything we want to. Our running backs running powerfully. Oh, Texas, you're one of the 3 most talented teams in this whole playoffs. We're still going to beat you. We're still going to expose your quarterback who's really been struggling. oh, Tennessee, the best SEC team that wasn't one of those 3-loss teams outside of like Georgia. Hey, we're still going to whoop you. And they did it. They beat all those teams really soundly. And they deserve all that credit for having that difficult path and overcoming it. They just overcame an insanely difficult path that previous national championships haven't. And I think they now set the bar for how we're going to measure future national championships. And although it may change, although the playoffs may change as far as could be 14 team, could be 16 team, could be different way of seeding these teams, although it may change, as of now, they are the standard of what it looks like to run the table. And they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be really cool to see moving forward, what teams do. When it comes to roster development and development of players, just to see like, okay, so in the 12-team playoff, we just saw what Ohio State did, and one, you can do it with a transfer quarterback that is only there for a year. Two, you can do it with a freshman phenom wide receiver. Three, you can do it with offensive line injuries that force guys to play out of position or force your backups into the game. It's like, okay, cool. Now that we've seen that, how do we build around that, right? Do we need to be so focused on, no, we got to have 22 guys that are amazing, or can we be like, hey, let's have 33 guys that are good enough to play? Interesting to see how that goes. I think we are sort of, in theory, unless it's a quarterback, kind of gone are the days of you have a really good team and a guy gets hurt and their season is completely over, because we're in the portal era where not only is are a lot of teams like not as good because Alabama, whose third string quarterback could start at a Syracuse, for example, but also you have all these other teams that are now better because they're picking up those scraps on the transfer portal and stuff. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that sort of affects roster development, how that affects teams looking at their season, right? So like, maybe moving forward, we have teams that are like, hey, we're going to rest our guys, right? We SMU was locked into the ACC championship game going into their last game of the season. In the future, do they rest their guys? Which sounds crazy, I know, but like, because it's like, oh, well, a loss could hurt your chances, but you want to keep your guys healthy. If you win the conference championship, you get in anyway, type thing. It'll just be really, really interesting now that we've gone through it to see, one, how it changes. Is the committee going to change things already? Are they already going to get rid of, automatic buys for conference champions, which it seems like is the growing consensus of what the first thing is to change, but what else? What else changes? And how quickly do teams adapt? How quickly do teams look at what Ohio State did this year as they plan for the future? Will be interesting to see.
Yep.
Well, let's move on to NFL playoffs. We haven't talked about it much because it just feels like things just keep happening so fast. But as of recording this, we are facing conference championship round this week. The Bills will be traveling to Arrowhead to face Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and the Eagles will be hosting the Washington Commanders, led by rookie phenom Jaden Daniels. And so, Nick, you had this great idea, and I love it, and I'm excited that we're going to do it. Basically, where we're gonna do a little draft here of the best remaining players as individual players in the playoffs, and so we're gonna have a little fun here. We'll just go back and forth 5 rounds, and we'll see who we end up with. So, Nick, because this was your idea and was such a good idea, I will let you first. You can have the first pick, my friend.
I appreciate it. And when I was thinking out this process of like how we're going to do this, I'm like, do we do the most impactful, or do we do the best, or do we do who's playing the best right now, or how we're thinking about it? And I was like, no, let's just do who's the best. Who are the best players we got right now? Who who are just the most badass of badasses. And I think right now, the quarterbacks stick out, and I'm going to take the dude who's proven to be the dude when it comes to these kind of games, and that will be Patrick Mahomes. First overall, really, like, to be honest, kind of sweating it out a little in terms of like the other two QBs that stand out to me here. I'm like, man, there are a couple of other badass QBs who are dragging their teams right now too. So I'll just take Patrick Mahomes first overall and feel good about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think no one could refute that draft pick. He's not who I would take first. Honestly, right now, when it comes to quarterback play, I put him at third of the four quarterbacks remaining. Just because of sort of what we've seen so far, what we've seen out of him this year. And I think one of the things that would be really, really special about Patrick Mahomes specifically, if the Chiefs do three-peat and we start having those conversations about, you know, Mahomes compared to Brady, is Brady also had seasons that he didn't really have a great season statistically, or that things were a little down. But in the end, his team still won the Super Bowl because he was that dude, and because he had that championship caliber, he had that championship medal, and he was able to, when the lights were brightest, was able to like, all right, you know what? We got into this tournament. It's all that we needed to do, and now just watch me do my thing. And so I think Patrick Mahomes certainly fits into that. But the quarterback that I'm going to take, because yeah, I mean this guy is just played so well this year. He has experience in these situations. He has gone and he has played to the very end against Patrick Mahomes in Arrowhead. And honestly, I think a lot of us are looking at whoever wins the AFC Championship game to be the odds-on favorite to win the Super Bowl. And so I'm going to take the other AFC quarterback with Josh Allen here with the number 2 overall pick, or with my first-round pick. He's just looked so good, man. He's just looked so good. The thing that has held him back has been his ability to take care of the football, has been the turnovers, has been the him trying to do too much and things getting out of hand. And man, he has just decided, like, I will not do that. That will, like, I don't know who that old Josh Allen was who struggled to take care of the football and make good decisions. He doesn't exist anymore. He's gone, right? Like, we saw in this game against the Ravens, you know, it was in the snow, right? It would have been really, really easy to just try to do too much, to try to do something that when you're playing in perfect conditions, you can easily pull off, or you are good enough that you can pull it off. Maybe not everybody, but in snow conditions, really nobody could do it. That's when we've seen him mess up in the past. When the Bills played the Bengals in the divisional round a couple years ago, like, we saw that from him then, right? Not this time, not this Josh. His ceiling has moved up a little bit, but the biggest thing with him is that floor has come shooting up, so that at his worst, he's still playing so much better than pretty much anybody he's facing.
Mm-hmm. I feel you there. Josh Allen would have been the next dude to me. Like, it's just kind of obvious to me that these two dudes, although one of them has all the trophies, all the rings, the other dude is just the second most badass of all the badasses in the league. Like, he might be the better dude as far as like skill set player, like he might be, but one of them's got all of everything and the other one doesn't. Like, it's just a matter of fact that right now it's like, oh, Josh Allen, you're looking a lot like Dan Marino, where you didn't win much of anything, and the other dudes in your era, the Joe Montanas, are winning MVPs and Super Bowls and sweeping everybody and whooping everybody up. And that's just kind of how it's feeling. A theme that's really hit me lately with a couple of these QBs and players right now is taking care of the football and really not turning the ball over. Mahomes right now, this is a crazy stat I heard today. He's on an 8-game streak right now, not even just personally. The Chiefs haven't turned the ball over in 8 games.
Wow.
Period. Haven't had a fumble or none of that. 0 turnovers in 8 straight games. That's ridiculous as an ability to take care of the ball. Josh Allen, as you were saying, he's gained the ability to take care of the ball roller coaster ride of Josh Allen of throwing a ton of interceptions and crazy balls. He has grown past that. He's grown a bunch as a player.
Yep.
And one of the other dudes we got left who hasn't really been talked about much, but who can take care of the football, offers a ton of juice with his legs, dragging a team with nowhere near as much talent as some of these other rosters. That will be my easy next pick, Jaden Daniels, as far as the QBs. Like, man, Jaden Daniels, you look at this offense, it's like, okay, Terry McLaurin's a Pro Bowl level player. And then like Zach Ertz 5 years ago was a Pro Bowl level player. And you've got Brian Robinson, a patchwork offensive line. Kingsbury's been doing a solid job. De'Ami Brown was looking like a bust before Jaden got there. Like, this offense is not anything to be scared of except for Jaden Daniels. It's looking a lot like those early Lamar Jackson offenses where it's like, okay, Lamar, and they got a complementary run game kind of because they have Lamar, so the running backs get better holes. And then it's like, okay, they got good tight ends. They got good tight end play. But the receiving core, the running back core is like not very threatening. And Washington, it's not very threatening. And it's Jaden Daniels being so good at football, being able to produce great, highly efficient offense, converting fourth downs, converting third downs, not turning the ball over, getting 2-point conversions, being able to just shred through defenses, injured ones maybe, but shredding through defenses with amazing efficiency. And so I feel so good about a player who might be a top 5, 6, 7 quarterback in the league as a rookie, which is insane to say. So I'm not really worried about Jaden Daniels here being my second pick.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great pick. I think that sets me up really well. You'd think that you're in the conference championship round of the playoffs. It means that the 4 quarterbacks are the 4 dudes, right? But, I'm going to take the only other guy left in the playoffs that is an MVP finalist, and that is running back from the Philadelphia Eagles, Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley showed on Sunday that he is legitimately the best offensive player on that team, that the Eagles' success has come because of him. Not just what he did on Sunday, but if you look at this Eagles team now compared to what they were last year, you look at this Eagles team now compared to what they were 2 years ago when they made their Super Bowl run. This Eagles team is different. This Eagles team looks like legitimately they could match up and beat whoever they face in the Super Bowl when the time comes because of Saquon Barkley. I mean, you're thinking, you're looking at this Eagles team, and let's say they don't have Saquon Barkley. You're playing a snow game. You're playing against Matthew Stafford. You're playing against a really good front seven in the LA Rams, right? You're thinking like Jalen Hurts is we're gonna have to rely on Jalen Hurts' arm, and that's not gonna go very well. No, because you can just give the ball to Saquon Barkley. I mean, he's just that dude. He takes care of the football. He gets you those yards. He is a powder keg about to explode every single time he touches the ball. There is no cool down with him. He could break a 70-yard touchdown run. The Eagles get the ball back, and he breaks another one on the first play from scrimmage. He's just like that. This Eagles team goes as far as Saquon Barkley goes, and Saquon Barkley has shown this year that there is really nothing that is going to stop him or slow him down. And so I have to go with Saquon Barkley here.
Yep. I'm 100% there with you. He's next up on my board too. MVP caliber player this year, 100%. I don't know if you saw, there was a clip floating around. So Saquon busted like 2 70, 80-yard touchdowns this last game against the Rams. The first was in the first half. Field looks like a normal football field. Second, there's just snow everywhere. It's coming down, and he's just galloping, rushing for a crazy long run. Same game, 2 completely different looking fields. Absolutely put the nail in the coffin of bailing out an Eagles team that really was kind of worried against the Rams and could have thrown there late. Like, man, him busting that huge touchdown run late really gave the cushion to the Eagles, and didn't even give them a cushion because their defense was just like, getting shredded by Matthew Stafford with those receivers like Puka and Kupp coming up clutch. But man, Saquon Barkley, we normally think of running backs as icing, but man, he's the best icing that we've seen in years, man. He's
for sure
doing incredible on that Eagles team.
For sure.
Next one for me, just I'm going to stick with my board. I'm going to stick with who I think can really carry a side of the ball, clutch late in playoff games, can absolutely change the dynamic. The current equivalent of Super Bowl winner Aaron Donald, that'd be Chris Jones. It just feels like Chris Jones has gotten kind of unappreciated in his day. It feels like since the D Ford mishap early in the Chiefs and Mahomes' career, and then they added, who was the other edge rusher who they kind of traded the pick and got when they traded away D Ford? I'm completely blanking on his name, but they got another edge rusher who's coming up clutch earlier in the Chiefs run. But late in the Chiefs run, Chris Jones, late in these football games, it might not always be sacks, but it's going to be a ton of pressure on the quarterback. They move him around. Spagnuolo trusts him to beat offensive tackles, beat centers, beat guards. He'll just beat whoever's in front of him and affect the game. That's Chris Jones for you.
Yeah, I mean, he's who I wanted. I went into the doc and deleted his name from
I saw that.
So that hopefully you wouldn't see him and you'd just move right past it. It didn't work, and I'm glad it didn't work because it would have been unfair of me to do that. So yeah, I mean, Chris Jones is Chris Jones, man. Like he's one of those guys, we think about the MVP award, right? And we think about who it's like, okay, these are MVPs, right? They're your quarterbacks, sometimes your running backs, sometimes your receivers. But then there's like that clump of guys that it's like, okay, these guys should be MVP candidates, but because of the position they play, they're not going to be. And this year, that's where you're looking at, maybe your Penei Sewell, you're looking at your Chris Jones, you're looking at these guys, and yeah, Chris Jones is absolutely, he's just that dude. He is really that dude, time and time again. A guy that you can, like you said, can always be counted on, which actually leads me to my next pick, which I think this might be an overdraft, and I think if you were to do draft analysis about it, you'd be like, oh, well, you could have gotten him later. And it's one of those things, the way I always look at this when it comes to draft analysis like this is you might be right, but when you want your guy, you want your guy. And though I would not call this guy my guy because personally I'm really not a fan, there is no one that shows up more in the clutch in the playoffs than Travis Kelce.
Yep.
I mean, he just does it. Last year, he had a bad year, and then he showed up in the playoffs and just did his stuff. This year, not a great year, and has just showed up in the playoffs. I mean, what he did against Houston last weekend. I mean, he's just like, you know what? I don't need to play the regular season. You guys get us into the playoffs. I'll dust off the pads and come in, and I'll do everything that you need me to do. He just does it time and time again. He's a veteran leader. Again, is this an overdraft? Sure. Do I think you were going to take him at 7? No. Do I think you'd take him at 9? Probably not. But you know what? I want my guy, and so I went and got him, and that's Travis Kelce.
I feel you there, man. So in the Google Doc, I have my top 10 who I built out my board like my top 10. And then I got a whole other 15 dudes who I think are even some more badasses. And Travis Kelce's there in the other badasses. But when I'm looking at my list, I'm like, man, do I want the future Hall of Famer, most clutch tight end since Gronk, basically, of the last 2 decades, who's been a staple and a diamond on this Chiefs team? Do I really think he's not that dude anymore? And then I'm like, last week against the Texans, I was thinking about him before you said it, and I'm like, okay, should I have put him in the top 10? And for you to get him here at 6, I have absolute respect for the pick. I have absolute respect for the player. He's up there with Jerry Rice as a postseason weapon, the production, the clutch factor. He's
Yep.
everything you want in that. And so I have nothing bad to say about it. That being said, I will jump around rather than the next dude I got on my board a little, and that would be my next pick. I think Lane Johnson, I just look at him as somebody who gets underappreciated offensive lineman. Right tackles, even especially, get less credit than the left tackles. I think somebody who locks down opposing edge rushers and can road grade in the run game. When we look at this Eagles team, it's a dual threat attack of the run game and the pass game. A.J. Brown being a superstar receiver, Saquon being a superstar runner. And then the dude that gets left in the wayside is a future Hall of Famer sitting right there, Lane Johnson. So I just think a dude who affects the game in multiple ways, who's an all-pro, who's a Hall of Famer, who's still playing at an insanely high level, who just makes the job of everybody else insanely easier. That'd be Lane Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a great pick. I think a lot needs to be said about how good the Eagles' offensive line has been considering Jason Kelce's retirement. I mean, I think a lot of us, and rightfully so, when you have a guy that has been a staple, a stalwart of your locker room for that long, has been a captain, has been a veteran presence, has been a guy that everybody's rallied around, retires, and especially at a position as important as center. Though I think that not enough people value the center position, but a guy as important as Jason Kelce, you're going to have to shift the offensive line around a little bit, like, okay, are we bringing in a rookie to play center that everybody else needs to learn what he's doing? Or are we going to move an offensive guard over and make somebody else play? Like there's always just going to be shuffling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that the Eagles offensive line has still been as good as they have been is very impressive. And Lane Johnson, along with some of the other guys, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, but Lane Johnson is definitely the guy that's like this is the guy that we're going to talk about here.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree with that pick. Think that's a great pick. So now here I am at pick number 8, and there's another guy that I want, but he is a guy that I do think that I can get at pick 10. And so I'm not going to take him right now. And so I'm sort of looking at this right now as who are the hottest guys, right? Like there are definitely guys that are better than this guy that I'm about to pick. But man, he has just been so on fire right now that it's like it's hard to look past him. There are other guys that play his position that would be valued higher if you're looking at a draft board. But this guy's just surged so much through this draft process. He's just made it so, man, you just can't help but think about him. And so I'm taking a wide receiver at this pick, and I'm taking Terry McLaurin. And I'm taking Terry McLaurin because, again, I think like 10 out of 10 times A.J. Brown is a better wide receiver than Terry McLaurin. I think probably 8 out of 10 times Devontae Smith is a better wide receiver than Terry McLaurin. But Terry McLaurin has just been – the Eagles don't use their wide receivers, right? Jalen Hurts threw for like 100 passing yards this last Sunday, okay? I think if the Eagles ran a pass-first offense, we saw what Devontae Smith did in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, right? So, but anyway – Terry McLaurin, man, he's just hot right now. He's had such a great year, man. I mean, he has wanted to get out of Washington for so many years because he just had no good quarterback play. Hasn't been on a competitive team. Nothing that seems like this is going anywhere. Seems like his career is being wasted away. And so he finally gets his shot. He finally gets a year. And you know what? Props to him for taking advantage of it and for just having just such a great year. I mean, he lit up Detroit last week. He lit up Tampa Bay the week before that. I think I'm really, really excited to see him go to battle with Quinyon Mitchell or Cooper DeJean or Darius Slay or some combination of the three of them. I mean, it's gonna be awesome to see this week. So I'm taking Scary Terry because boy has he been scary lately.
I feel you. I feel you. I really like him. I think that him and Jaden basically being the core of this offense, they've really made music together. So I got absolute respect for that pick too. There's still so many good players, and I'm taking baby Chris Jones here. That'd be Jalen Carter. Watching the Rams game, like what Chris Jones did in the Super Bowl last year, what Aaron Donald did in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, Jalen Carter just ruined the Rams late in that game. Like he just said, oh, wait, I'm just better than all of your offensive linemen, and I can ruin it for you. And Jalen Carter, although being a second-round player, although being a dude who had off-the-field issues in college, was basically seen as potentially the best player in that draft that he came out in. He has really come on as being the dude, as being the best pass rusher even on this Eagles team that's had a fearsome pass rush for years. And he's an interior dude, but he's a dude that ruins the game that could be the next in this great lineage of awesome defensive tackles who have made deep, deep playoff runs this last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. I think he's for as young as he is, I mean, he's just only going to get better. And I definitely think that he's probably the best defensive player that we've got left on the board right now. And so with my last pick here, I'm going to take a guy that, again, when you have your guy, you have your guy. This dude he's just played so well, man. I mean, especially in their most recent game in the divisional, like when it was there towards the end and you needed a closer, this guy was closing. And this is a guy that he's on a team that has a lot of other dudes that take up a lot of attention on that side of the football, on the defensive side of the football. And so maybe he doesn't get his flowers as much as he should, but when it comes time to shine, he is there. And that is Kansas City Chiefs linebacker Drew Tranquill. I like Tranquill a lot. I like Tranquill a lot. I think you look at the Chiefs defense, obviously if you have to care about and worry about George Karlaftis. You have to worry about Chris Jones. You have to worry about Nick Bolton. But in that game, in that Houston game, when Houston had that drive that they're like, we have to score here, and it was like sack, including like a 4th and 10 sack that you and I are texting about, like, are we sure we're running a play here? It was Drew Tranquill that was doing it. And on top of that, he covers pretty well those running back and those tight end routes. And so I like him a lot. I like the way he plays. He plays really hard. He plays with the chip on his shoulder. And he's been a guy that has experienced lots of defeat and lots of success also. Good locker room guy. I think the leadership and the veteran experience that he and Travis Kelce bring together is really going to boost my locker room. And so that's why I'm taking Drew Tranquill.
I feel you there. Just to shout out a couple of other names that I had written down. AJ Brown, of course, a superstar who has some diva tendencies. James Cook, who has reinvented the running back run game in Buffalo. Like, obviously, the quarterback run game's been there, but they've become a run-first team with James Cook being able to just run it 8 times down the field, just boom, 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 rush the ball down the field. Special teamer Harrison Butker, who's been so clutch, can kick such long kicks. Like, man, he's got to get his flowers too here for being a big cut in the dynasty. Ton of Eagles players, man. Like, when I was writing out these names, it's Eagle after Eagle after Eagle, and it's not Jalen Hurts, man, but it's a ton of other supporting dudes. Zach Bond, who came in, man, from the Saints, Devonta Smith, Nolan Smith, Jordan Mailata. Like, man, that's just 5 dudes who are studs. And so, man, there are a bunch of other dudes here who haven't been named. A couple of other Chiefs, some Bills here. Khalil Shakir, really grown into a really good player. Deion Dawkins, really a stabilizer on that offensive line for the Bills. Yep. Just so many good dudes in this playoffs. It's
Curtis
awesome.
Samuel has been playing really well. I wouldn't take him with a pick in this draft, but he definitely deserves being mentioned as part of that stable of what everybody else thinks is mediocre wide receivers that the Bills have that are all playing like true number ones, and Josh Allen is getting them the ball. Curtis Samuel definitely needs to be mentioned in that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm there with you, man. Just so many studs, and I just feel like we don't have the superstar receivers or some of the same superstars we've seen for like singular focused offenses. But these are deep offenses and defenses with tons of studs everywhere. The Bills, deep defense, deep offense. Kansas City, same thing. Eagles, bunch of studs on both sides. Washington, little different because they've kind of overachieved this year and have been ahead of schedule. But just so many good dudes, so many unheralded dudes. So awesome that we got so many studs though in this playoffs. So stoked when you see good
Definitely.
football out there.
Yep, 100%. It's gonna be a great weekend this weekend with conference championships. Nick, quickly, what are your predictions for the games this week?
So I think Eagles pretty well beat up on Washington. Depending on Jalen Hurts' health, I feel like Jalen Hurts got a little dinged up late in that game. I think that the Eagles, though, they just have such an overwhelming talent gap. I think that of these four teams we're talking about, Eagles have the most collective talent and Washington has the least. And so I think that's kind of where the discrepancy is. Biggest discrepancy, the other direction, I think, is the quarterback play. I think that those are the two gaps, but I think talent trumps quarterback play as far as the sizable gap there. I think that I really want Buffalo to break through, man, but it feels like Kansas City is just inevitable. They're that Thanos snap. They're the everybody says rigged, but man, they just figure out ways to win and ways to beat the other team. And the Bills, this feels like it's the best, deepest Bills team of the last half decade. But man, this Kansas City team's also super deep. So I got to go. Sadly, a rematch of a Super Bowl from 2 years ago. That'd be Eagles Chiefs.
Hey, I mean, it would, yeah, like you said, sadly, but it's probably what's going to happen. But you know what? I don't know. I just have a feeling that this is actually the time that Josh Allen's going to break through. And so I definitely see the Bills winning this week. I just have that feeling
Okay.
that's going to happen. I think the way one that they've already beaten the Chiefs this year and beat them handedly. Now they played them at home and there was there was some snow, but still like they played a really really good solid game and beat them and maybe proved to themselves like no, we can beat these guys. And then I also think that Philadelphia is winning, but let me put it this way: I would not be surprised if Washington continues this little run here and wins that one. It would not surprise me if this Washington team is eerily similar to the Joe Burrow Bengals team that made the Super Bowl against the Rams that got in as the wild card and it was like, well, this is a young team, we'll see what happens, and then it's like, oh my gosh, they just keep doing it, right? So we'll see what happens. But man, I tell you what, Jaden Daniels is special. He is special. I still don't think he deserved the Heisman Trophy, but that does not take away from how great of a quarterback he really is. So that's what I think is going to happen this week. I think all of America outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Kansas City, Missouri, we're all hoping that Buffalo wins and that Washington wins. But we'll see how it goes. So Nick, thanks so much for taking the time to talk and hang out here. Everybody, thanks so much for watching, for listening. Yeah, enjoy the games this weekend. Let us know in the comments what you think, how you think those games are going to play out. And we will talk to you next time.